Yeah, so Roger, you were saying it's been a while since we've spoken, and down the pub where conversation happens, often that
Yeah,
maybe that's people's real fear. They don't want anyone meeting up.
I think that um, so-called COVID-19, which has now been labelled, I think it's SARS-2 or something, the health organisations or whatever, the people who categorise viruses and things. It's a thing called nosmology. Is the term for categorising illnesses? Okay,
Right.
and the nosmologists tell us that COVID-19 is in fact indistinguishable from this whole SARS thing, and SARS itself was a similar scare back in 2003.
Okay.
And if you click away, sort of, a few degrees of separation from the mainstream and the alternative media coverage, you will find a lot of stuff, which in my own mind I trace back to Bruce Charlton's work when he was sacked as the editor of an Elsevier, what they called publishing magazine, for publishing a paper which was disputing the connection between HIV and AIDS. And this is a very, very sensitive area, the whole idea of how viruses work, vaccinations, and all the rest of it. I mean, the details of it, it's hard to go into because you have to be prepared to do a few days reading. And if you read quick like I do, it's a few days. If you don't read quick like I do, it'll take you probably several weeks. And but the simple.
It's not just reading though, Roger, is it? It's not just reading. I mean,
What do you mean?
if it were just reading, then you could just hand the data to a computer and say, "Oh, well done, you've read
Well,
it." You're obviously
this is
piecing it together, aren't you? You're piecing
well,
together lots of different bits of information, not just that you're reading, but how it
well,
all fits
that's
together.
right. But that's why conversations when we started speaking today, and I sort of said that when you share an idea, you don't end up with half an idea each. There are, two ideas and then multiples of that because you've got other stuff. So um, they say a trouble shared is a troubled half, but a thought shared is a thought doubled, and doubled to the nth degree. So this this current epidemic, panicdemic, whatever you want to call it, um, is massively exaggerated. And a couple of degrees of separation, you'll find people with more level heads sort of saying, well, hold on a second, let's get it into proportion. Um, that in of itself is a controversial thing to say at the moment, Ranjan. People are running high on emotion and fear, and you know, uh, they don't want to hear it. They want to stack up on their loo roll. That's the that's the that's the thing that the herd wants to stick together to and do all the things that everyone else is doing because that makes people feel comfortable.
Well,
Uh,
as you know, I rather like making people occasionally feel slightly uncomfortable, especially in the world of ideas. And there's very few people who give me that free rein as much as you do, Roger. So, may I at this stage tell you that everything that you're saying is completely false, and it's mainly as a
you,
result. What's that?
you're breaking up about every fourth word, so I'm getting sort of Norman
Ah,
Cousins
okay.
sounding.
Shall I start again, or is that any
Have,
different?
have you got Bluetooth on or something? Or
No, but I might have. You know how they have in the settings here. Uh, is that better?
hmm,
Because I've switched off the automatically adjust microphone settings. Has that improved?
yeah, it's not.
Is that any better?
No.
You know what's really going on, don't you, Roger? I was about to destroy you in an argument, and you decided to.
I didn't get any of that. It says turning subtitles on, and they're not coming on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Hold on, I've put turn subtitles off. I can hear you now.
Is that better?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Well, it gives me great pleasure, a rare occasion, as you know, for me to say to you that everything that you've said is completely false. Um, and the reason for that is due to your own circumstance, which is that in Sweden, you are untouched by this entire coronavirus. And therefore, as you are appearingly naturally insulated from this whole thing, you can afford to be complacent and put all of the other soldiers on the front line to be wiped out by the coronavirus.
Well, it's a little bit like being a climate change denier, you know. I mean, I'm not saying that flu doesn't exist and flu isn't killing people. You know, it is a flu. That's a fact. It is a flu, and it is killing people. Um, but there's rather more to it than that. I mean, I've been up quite early, and I was reading about morbidity rates, mortality rates, about actuarial mathematics of life expectancy and stuff like that. Because all this stuff exists. I mean, I'm a numbers man, and you know, when there's a big thing like this going on, you kind of think, right, what are the numbers guys saying? Who are the experts on the numbers of this? And then I go off and I go and read them, and I look at their maths, and I kind of think, right, okay, well that makes sense. And then when you plug back into human world and the wordsmiths and the narrative jockeys and all the rest of it, nothing tells a story as purely as a good equation. Nothing. I mean, there are biases in equations and all the rest of it. But in written language, particularly the narrative based storytelling, which is so beloved of our lords and masters, um, you know, it's a recipe for imprecision, and it is very imprecise.
But can I ask you? Can I ask you how complex an equation are you prepared to put up with in the pursuit of story analysis? And are you going to tell me that they are never very complex anyway? Because that would then afterwards imply that your love of simplicity may be getting in the way of the truth.
Well, I don't think so.
Aesthetics, I should say.
I read something the other day, which I found interesting, and there's a climate scientist called Dr. Roy Spencer, and he works for NASA at the University of Alabama Huntsville project, and he, along with a guy called John Christie, Professor John Christie, they're responsible for maintaining the satellite record for basically weather, Earth temperatures, near Earth temperatures, etc., sea levels, all the rest of it, the network of NASA satellites. And they published that. And they're both bad boys of the climate science in that often when the BBC want to produce an alarmist climate record, they leave the UAH record out because it's inconvenient. It's actually the most comprehensive observational record we have of these claims that people make. But he says an interesting thing because at the extreme end of the climate debate, there is a question as to whether CO2 is in fact a warming gas or a cooling gas. It's generally accepted that the idea of greenhouse gases is a misnomer. But what Roy says about 2 blogs ago, because someone had put up this idea, well, you know, CO2 isn't a greenhouse gas anyway, right? And someone has brought that argument up again, and what he says is, he says, I spend a lot of time trying to sort of explain to people, what a complex system the climate is. But he says there are equations, and there are some things with it that you can only explain with equations, right? And that's really hard to get. So it's the same point I was making about the imprecision of language compared to the precision of mathematics, if you like. But here's the rub. If you are an analytic person and you are someone who is involved in the expression of phenomena through mathematics, you still have to explain, be able to explain to people simply what you're on about. Okay, and it takes a huge amount of patience, but you have to explain it, and often that takes much more time than people are prepared to spend or want to spend, because simple answers or a bumper sticker, fulfills the purpose that it ticks the box, if you like, of being concerned. If you can show you're a concerned Christian by putting a fish on your bumper sticker, or any kind of bumper sticker, any kind of badge, it's a shorthand for sort of saying, well, I'm with this lot or I'm with that lot, but it still doesn't denote any kind of understanding or deeper thought or commitment, really. So yeah, but the point about the actuarial numbers to do with epidemiological statistics is really just this: the period of time this has supposedly been with us is simply not long enough to make any sensible conclusions. You just can't do it. You can ask questions. I mean, questions are great, and the more the merrier. But you simply cannot explain the degree of the reaction that there's been to this based on a flu virus, right? Next up to that, then, where I've been is well, okay, we knew a financial crash was coming. I think financial crashes are usually controlled anyway, but even that, the extent of this reaction for a controlled demolition of the finance system to bring in another system, whatever, it's still an overreaction even to do that. It's not necessary to do just that. It just isn't. It's there's a lot more to it than that, because converting to a different currency base, bailing out the banks, whatever, calling a sovereign, making a bail-in and all the rest of it, not nearly as managing that is not nearly what they're doing. It's just not necessary to manage that. People would accept that, is what I'm saying. And so the amount of effort they're putting into this story, there has to be more. So I've been looking at troop movements and things like that, and sort of thinking, well, are they going to invade somewhere? Is there going to be some sort of shooting war? What is there that is so likely to upset people that they want people to be, basically under curfew? Because that's what it amounts to. It amounts to a curfew, which is something you get in the depths of wartime. Curfews. You usually get them in civil insurrections or civil wars or stuff like that, because they're applied to limited geographical areas. But effectively, they're trying to put the whole of the Washington Consensus under curfew. Now, if there was going to be a nuclear strike, this is what they tried to do. They tried to get people, this term that came out about shelter in place or whatever. I mean, that's a very Cold
Oh yeah,
War.
place in shelter. I think it's
Yeah,
place in shelter. This is in America, right? In New York, they're using this. Well, they I don't think they've done
shelter
it,
in
but they're
place.
talking.
Yeah,
Is it
it's a
shelter in
term
place?
they're
That's it. Yeah.
using in the States, but this is
Is
our
it a very
politics, or
old
British
term? Is it?
politics and American politics are really intertwined now, and they have been since the Sheffield rally. The Kinnock rally. You don't remember that when he was
Actually, I do. I
yes,
do. Is that the
all
where
of
they
that.
said he is
All
the next?
right, all
Is that
right, all of
where he
that.
came when they said this is the next prime minister?
I was reading about a guy called Moloch, or Moloch, who was in that government, and his successor in the post he was in, which was Asia and Africa Secretary,
You mean
was
in the
actually
US?
Glenys Kinnock. Malak Brown, the guy's called.
Sorry, but are you talking about the EU administration?
No, no, I'm talking about the Blair government,
Right.
because I mean, put it this way: David Cameron was the continuation of Tony Blair by other means. And of course, the question becomes: is Boris really a continuation of Tony Blair by other means?
No.
Um,
Boris is a continuation of Gordon Brown.
but it's essentially the same thing. Gordon Brown is just that, they're two sheiks of the same arse, Brown and Blair, and they ended up not liking each other. But they, they
No, I just enjoyed saying no. Of course, it's all the same thing. Yeah. Um, yeah. Brown, but also I think what you're saying now. May I take the mic for a moment?
yeah, go for it.
It feels like Hyde Park on the Sunday, doesn't it? A little bit, but I'll say, excuse me, time for some radical Islam. Yeah. So basically, in 2011. I would guess May, June, something like that, possibly even September. There was a talk given at the London School of Economics by a man who used to be at the FT, moved on to the Economist. He was buttonwood at the Economist after having done the short view and the long view at the FT for 25 years. He's now he's possibly free exchange now at the Economist. His name is Philip Coggan. I'm sure you know who he is due to your conquest of Doe, etc. But he wrote a book called Paper Promises, and he did a talk as part of his book tour for that. And at the end, so he talks about the history of silver and gold and the Wizard of Oz, and is it Jennings Brown or
William
whatever?
William Jennings Bryant.
Yeah, he mentions these people, and talks about the 1/17 ratio between gold and then how much it gets sort of diluted by and all of
Yeah.
that stuff, and how that's the sign of the end of empire, blah de blah. So he's essentially, he is, as you said, he's using words to actually talk about equations, uh, from a social science perspective. And then at the end, he says, well, of course, in 30 years' time, may I remind you, that was about 10 years ago, he says, he goes, well, I mean, ultimately, of course, the reserve currency will be Chinese. But I'm paraphrasing. He may not have used the word ultimately, given his take on time. But, he said, we're going to have a reserve currency that's Chinese. And of course, there will have to be a changeover. And what will that changeover be? I mean, it will happen, in 30 years' time, it will have happened. When it will happen over the next 30 years, not sure. And what's going to happen is China going to telephone America, or more to the point, is Goldman Sachs going to telephone America on behalf of China and say, my client is sitting on $1 or $2 trillion worth of US treasuries. What do you want for them? Something like that. So that's just what he was mentioning there. And this feels like a brilliant time to either to stave that off somehow. And given that you've got all of this pandemic scare, but then at the same time, based on what you were saying, another possibility popped into my head, which was maybe there's a lot more coordination and harmony going on at central bank level than we would like to think. After all, they're all working together right now to pump money in and all we've seen before. But they're doing it this way. So this is what's going down, and
Another
there's a
strand
degree
of
of
what I looked at,
going.
which kind of comes into that as well, was I was looking at. Do you remember when John Bolton got the sack? Trump sacked John Bolton last year, right? This is in the States now, right?
Yeah.
At that time, at the time of his appointment, another guy who I saw on the Atlantic Council the other day resigned from his position at the CDC, right? The drug enforcement thing.
CDC, isn't that the Center for Disease Control?
Yeah, they're the people who are dealing all this flu in the States. Well, the next thing that I looked at was the ex-German ambassador for the United States ambassador to Germany, okay, had been appointed as the assistant or acting rather advisor on national security to Donald Trump. Okay, now Trump has nominated someone else apart from him, who's this other guy. I've been reading up on these guys today, right? Now, the thing about the guy in Germany is that he made statements about in support of conservative elements in the German government and stuff, and was very, very vocal against the Nord Stream gas pipelines and all the rest of it, right? Now,
Russian gas.
Yeah. Now, the important thing about Russian gas is what currency will that be settled for? So this is the currency idea, the reserve currency, petrodollar stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's been happening in the oil market and the gas markets? I mean, the price during this week has been low as $18 a barrel. As low as $18 a barrel. I think it's up to about 21 or 22 again. It recovered a bit towards the end of the week. But people have mentioned the Putin and Saudi spat, if you like. And the Saudis, I guess the story is the Saudis are trying to drive down the price of oil to damage the Russian economy, which it won't be doing in the same respect, in that the Russians obviously are still selling a lot of gas and that price has gone down too. But they do a lot of business with China on a quid pro quo basis, on a barter basis, rather than and not in dollars and stuff like that.
Oh, you mean you can't shut them down, basically?
Well, since they've been under sanctions, which they have been pretty much for the whole term of the
2014.
Same with Iran. It's worked much better on Iran than it has on Russia, because Russia has so many resources, but it has developed its domestic industrial capacity, and of course they are allies with China now, and of course so the whole story of the 20th century, well, and 19th century as well, really, were the Western elites being very worried about the potential in Russia if it gets its act together. Because Russia, if it gets its act together, apart from the fact that it has quite a low population due to, how many people have been killed in wars, to Second World War, have everything in place to be more powerful than the United States of America. It's bigger than the United States of America. It's got as much in terms of resources and all the rest of it. And of course, so some people are sort of saying that Germany and Russia are likely to become more pally. And this again is another geopolitical story bubbling under all of this. And it's played out in Ukraine, particularly in Crimea. And This is the Russian meddling idea. Um, and then you've got Turkey between that, and then you've got Iran. So it's playing out on two fronts. And Trump is still the big question in my mind. I mean, I still don't know whether he's put it this way. I don't know whether he's Jackson, President Jackson, or the other guy, the general that betrayed them in the war. You remember what was he called? Oh,
This is World
Bennett.
War Two.
No. In the War of Independence in America, there was a British general. He was an American general, but he betrayed them, and he moved to England afterwards. Arnold Bennett, was he called Arnold Bennett?
Okay,
Something
I
like
don't know.
that. Benedict Arnold, that's it. Benedict Arnold. Look at Benedict Arnold. So I'm not sure whether Donald Trump is a Richard Jackson, or the President Jackson, or a Benedict
Andrew
Arnold,
Jackson, yeah.
Andrew Jackson, or Benedict Arnold. But I must say I'm 70% in favour of Andrew Jackson with President Trump, and it's impossible to tell. And of course, in his position, you, it's simply not. I mean, he'd be dead by now if even they could tell the difference. He must be playing.
So what about Boris Johnson? Could you call
Well,
him
with
could you
him,
call him Benedict Arnold, or without a doubt? Or are
well,
you
with him, it would be, is he Winston Churchill or Lord Haw? And I'm thinking more Lord Haw.
right?
Lord Haw was Germany calling, or whatever.
Right, was he a pacifist or something?
No. He was hung after the war for making the broadcasts into Britain from Berlin, sort of trying to demoralise people. You
Clever.
never heard of Lord Haw?
Well, I
Must
have
be
heard the
my
name, but I don't
generation
know.
or something. I don't know. Yeah, but
Right. Hmm.
yeah. So I don't know. To a certain extent, I mean, Sedwell is still there. They haven't got rid of Dominic Cummings yet, although he's been very much in the background in this current sort of thing, hasn't he? But what's going down at the moment, it's I don't know, Ranjan. I really don't. It's so hard to figure.
Well, it's pretty simple. Essentially, Rishi Sunak is the de facto leader of the country when it comes to sales. If you have an idea and you need it to be platformed, you tell him and he can do it. Now, the question is, what will he do? What will he talk about? So he's currently bringing all of this stuff in. Do you think he's placed? Do you think he's just going to disappear?
Well, I mean,
I don't. I think he's there. Um, if anything ever goes wrong, he can just go to India. But I mean, given that his father-in-law is
mm,
the Infosys billionaire, now, yeah, when I look at the comment section in social media, they love him. I mean, everyone's there saying, "Oh, Rishi Sunak, he's amazing." I mean, it's really something to see how much everybody likes him. So part of me is torn on this because the fact that he's brown on its own means that I just turn around and I go, I don't know, there's something more than with Sajid. Maybe it's because he's Hindu as well. I look at him and I say, fucking hell, look,
what
you know,
he appeals to you more than Sajid David did.
not purely because Sajid Javid is Muslim, right? Because I don't care about any of that stuff. Sajid Javid did very well at what he does. Um, at the time and place, if you talk about navigating and just getting somewhere, just purely Machiavellian, blah, blah, in terms of what was working at the time, fucking hell, he took it all the way up there. But the way in which the floor got wiped and he got replaced, obviously people had that planned, not for long necessarily. But I mean, the fact that Sunak was doing all of the TV debates made it pretty obvious that, he was being groomed for something more than Amber Rudd was. But Sunak's only been an MP for 5 years, less than
Well,
five
yeah.
years.
I
Um,
don't think Sajid Javid has been for that long either, has he? I mean, they've
well,
obviously
2010. I mean,
yeah, they're
compared,
bringing in a new guard, aren't they? But um,
but going back to what's going on. So you've got Rishi Sunak there, and surely, because so little is known about him, the only things that people really know about him is that he worked in, at Goldman and the Children's Investment Fund,
mm,
and apart from that, he worked for his father-in-law's firm, um, which is about managing lots of money, blah blah blah. So his father-in-law is still something to do with Infosys. Infosys have loads of contracts in the UK. I mean, I don't know what they are, but they do. And so you've got all the health data as well. Rishi Sunak's mum ran a pharmacist, and his father was a GP. So he's got the Thatcher. And if you look at Patel, Javid, and Sunak, all of them, their parents ran shops. Like the pharmacist,
we really
the
are becoming a nation of shopkeepers.
yeah, exactly. So it's they're much closer to the Margaret
Of course,
Thatcher.
Councillor Thatcher, he ran a shop as well, didn't he?
Sorry.
Councillor Thatcher ran a shop. And strangely enough, I mean, they're not the only ones. I mean, George Osborne, his dad's a shopkeeper. It's a very posh one, but it's,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so so Margaret Thatcher, was she Margaret Roberts, right?
yeah.
Anyway, so
Councillor Roberts,
right,
her dad, I think he had a shop, didn't he? I
right,
think.
exactly. So, running the shop and that whole thing of, the macroeconomy is exactly the same as running a shop and blah blah blah. So that's what we've got going on. But then at the same time, if you think about it, I saw one video of Rishi Sunak 5 years ago interviewed on Indian television in Yorkshire, and they say to him, we know who you are because of your father-in-law. That's why we know who you are. Or, that's why we would be interested in who
Mhm.
you are. But none of this like UK politics stuff. We could care less about that. But your father-in-law, now that's interesting. And he talks about that. He basically said, yes, my father-in-law, he talks to me. We get on. He's backing me basically. He's advising me. It can be very intimidating. And then he said, what my father-in-law says is this. It's all very good to have trust in God and, you know, uh, the world and people. But, when God speaks, you trust God. Everybody else has to bring data to the table. And I thought, well, that's quite interesting given that he's Infosys. See, that's just part of the fucking sales pitch, isn't it? Yeah, everyone else must bring data to the table. And then you just think, right, okay, so if you look right underneath, you know, people like you obviously will be looking at Cheltenham and all this kind of stuff. But, if you look right underneath the internet and where everything is going and moving and stuff like that, which I have no idea about, what's going on with the cybersecurity in this country. uh, what I was watching before I spoke to you just now on March the 6th, I think, maybe March the 5th. So 2 weeks ago, Oliver Dowden, and did they cover this on UK Column? I bet they would have. Oliver Dowden made his first appearance on British television since becoming the Minister for Fun. And yeah, so it was 2 weeks ago. I was just watching it. Obviously, it's
Mm.
deleted, isn't it? Deleted down the memory hole. I haven't uploaded it yet. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm just wondering whether I should do a Charlie Booker screen wipe. So I would be combining my English language teaching with a little bit of, which is not defunct but not really
Mm.
up and running. I could combine my English language teaching with a little bit of Charlie Booker screen wipe or something like that. Just listening to what they say. So they cover about 4 or 5 topics over about 7 or 8 minutes. The first topic, the headline topic, is what sports events are you going to cancel?
Mm.
Bear in mind that he's digital culture, media, and sport, and you have all of this shit going on. You know, Nicky Morgan before saying, I'm going to flush the BBC down the toilet, blah, blah, blah. You know, all of these other things going on, Cairncross review, major things going on, regulation of social media, all of this shit going on. But he comes on, and for about 3 or 4 of his allotted 7 or 8 minutes, he's basically just saying, I was at the rugby on Saturday with the Prime Minister. There were many people there, so there's no problem. Now, the tautological nature of that statement for someone like you is obviously visible and almost unforgivable. But because it's the third statement that he makes and it's very similar to the second and the first, and there's a fourth one coming, people won't necessarily clock, you know, what a poor performance he's giving. He kept on saying, we're guided by the evidence. You know, we're not going to close anything. We're not at that stage. We're far from that stage. But now we can see within 2 weeks of that, they closed the fucking pubs. Um, and some people say they should have shut it all earlier. Anyway, the point
I,
is,
I just,
let's not get distracted, Roger. I'm talking about Oliver Dowden's performance, and the
yeah,
point is Oliver Dowden, and I'm segueing from Rishi Sunak and cybersecurity and his father-in-law, and God knows what the play is, you know, behind that. But the Oliver Dowden, you know what his job was before?
no idea.
Well, that is the type of thing that our friends at UK Column would be covering like that. So that's why I assumed you'd know. He was head of the Cabinet Office.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
And do you know how long he's been an MP?
Uh,
2015.
right. Because the
And
other one is the education minister now, Gareth
William,
Williamson.
yeah,
I mean,
brilliant,
because he
brilliant.
was chief whip, wasn't he? And like,
At
I
least
mean,
it was
he's
an
not very
MP,
old.
though.
He's
I mean, at
3 years.
least it was an MP, even though he's completely behind the scenes. I mean, the thing about all of this stuff, it's just a clear example of when you see one of these people on television. I mean, obviously, they're not talking to you. It's all referent power, isn't it? They're basically, there's
Oh,
someone
I've got to
behind.
say, did you see Hancock on on Andrew Marr?
I refuse to watch any of this shit,
Oh,
man. I mean,
mate, oh, it was hilarious. Uh, You know, when they're sat in the studio and they're sort of saying they're coming on and all the rest of it, and then it's going to be him.
mm.
He was he was striking poses
I really
into the camera, sort of trying to look, bored.
mysterious.
So, it was so funny. You could see he was, practicing his eyebrows, sort of inflections.
I think it's funny
He'd
that you say
obviously been
because
practicing in front of the mirror.
Hancock
It's hilarious.
Hancock was in the cabinet office at some point. Hancock is one of those guys that's done all of the jobs. You know, I think there was a time where he was simultaneously
Can I just,
business off.
before you
He was
say this, you do your speech bubble thing. You must get some of the footage of Hancock gazing appealingly into the lens before
oh,
he goes
thanks,
on
yeah.
bar and put some bubbles in there.
Oh
Just,
yeah, I haven't done
anything.
one for ages.
It's just
Well, I mean, Roger, I think we can have some fun doing that. So I mean, consider that half a commission,
it
and
needs to be done. Because I
after
watched
that, I'll
it,
get
I
you.
thought
I'll
I'm
get you
going
to
to
put
watch
it.
this, and I couldn't get over what a complete jerk he was. Just
Well, just to say this, right? This is how on it you are because we know we're talking about puppet strings and stuff like that. Whether it's Sunak, Dowden, or Hancock. Hancock was cabinet office minister before,
right.
and you know who the minister for the cabinet office is now?
I don't think I do.
Whatever it is, however bad it could be, double it, and double it again. There's only one. Apart from Chris Grayling, there's only one.
I've no idea.
Michael Gove.
Oh, is he?
Yeah,
Okay.
he's responsible for running the whole civil service. You know, it's like that's
Yeah.
what's going down. So anyway, Dowden, he starts off talking about the sport. Then I think he's asked about supermarkets. Um, and no, just before supermarkets, she says it. And we've discussed this before, not at length, but she says it, the woman on the sofa. She looks at him on screen and says, "You've set up a disinformation unit, haven't you?" She says, "You've set up a counter disinformation unit, haven't you?" And he describes it twice using the word cell in a completely normal way. He goes, "Oh, yes, the counter disinformation cell, does this, does that." He casually said, the whole of this bit of the interaction was only a minute, right, out of an 8-minute thing. And so it was one of those kill them with kindness sandwich, one hardcore, meaningful propaganda open thing in plain sight for less than 24 hours and then wipe it. But she said she didn't say you've done this or tell us about this. She goes, "You've done this, haven't you?" So doubt before the start. This is Surkov. This is fucking Putin, man. She goes, "You've done it, haven't you?" And he says, "Oh yeah, yeah, it's all run of the mill stuff." And then at some point he said, she said, "Oh, it's hostile states, right?" He said, "We've seen no evidence of hostile states." So you're thinking, why did you say it then? Why did you say it's because of hostile states when the first thing he says is nothing to do with that? Like, brr. He says, "We've seen no evidence of hostile states. Actually, what we're doing is there's only really one message. We're trying to get everyone to clean their hands." 20 seconds. I can't say that often enough. You're thinking, we're talking about a fucking counter disinformation cell, and you're saying it's there to get people to clean their hands. Well, I mean, can't you just say we're here to tell the truth? Um,
Yeah.
so,
I
it,
just don't.
so hold on. Then, in this minute, he also says we're collaborating with the social media companies. Casual, casual.
Yeah. Oh no, shit,
So
Sherlock.
yeah, but just to say this, I don't think that's the kind of sentence that someone like you feels intensely relaxed about. I suddenly realized when he said that, I thought, so what you're saying is social media companies are on secondment at government and they're all tweaking the algorithms in order to like get what they want believed. Like this is what they're fucking openly saying.
Yeah.
I've never heard them openly say that. Have you heard that before? Openly said by a government minister, we are working with them, right? So
Well,
this,
I mean,
this is
where did Tim Clegg go and work after he lost in the
yeah,
election?
exactly.
Oh yeah, Facebook. That's it.
But I've never heard them just openly admit it like that. And when I say openly admit it, as in it wasn't done with a drum roll, but it was just put there. So, in terms of the change that we're supposed to be tolerating, I mean, but for corporate criminality, David White and Steve Toombs wrote this book called Unmasking the Crimes of the Powerful in 2003. I read a copy of it from the library, and he says, people thought that with the rise of globalization, power went from governments to markets. But what they often forget is that the corporation, very often with government, they all just reinforce each other. Um, and so, these algorithms working together like that.
Yeah, I mean it's classic fascism, state monopoly capitalism. It just absolutely that we're there.
Yeah, and that's we look at
There's
what they
no
did with
getting
the
around it. That's where we're at, and you know how the hell do we get out of this? That's the is anyone even trying to get back onto a democratic track?
Did you see what Bailey said? Andrew Bailey, by the way, welcome to Planet Earth. Uh, did you see what Andrew Bailey said? I mean, again, I didn't read it in detail, but he basically just said unlimited funds for large companies.
Oh, well,
So the feudalism, the elimination of risk, as you say, the patronage, there you go. All large companies, everything's cool. Everybody else might chuck you a crumb, but
Yeah.
That's the
Shut
order.
up and do as you're told. That's the. I. I mean, of course, having such a oppressive episode, if that is the idea to go on to that economic model, I mean, sure, people are going to be pissed off about that, but even that, I just it at the back of my mind, I keep thinking Iran. Are they going to invade Iran?
They don't have to.
Russia. Are they going to lob a few nukes at Russia?
Yeah,
What? What?
they don't have to invade Iran because apparently Iran is completely going down right now from the sanctions and everything else.
Well, but that's what we're told, isn't it? And but the point is that Iran, China, and Russia are not only close to each other politically, they're close to each other geographically. And what what happens with Iran if it does crash or whatever? Um, is that going to be determined by European, US, or Sino Russian uh, factors? I don't know.
Well,
What's
I
Fed
assume the Russians. I
advised
assume the
mortgage
Russians would step in, isn't it? As
raise above 4%?
yeah, it's basically just saying that American mortgages are turning into junk.
It's just a replay, isn't it? It's not just history rhyming. It's it's a replay. It's plagiarism. This
I
is
love it.
not a rhyme.
So you wouldn't call that historic plagiarism, is it? It's this plagiaristic history. Yeah. Uh, US and Mexico
Taste
considering partial.
2008, isn't it? So so much of this with all the narratives and what they trot out. It's just hackneyed old, um, retreaded chick-lit almost. I mean, they're moronic narratives um, that seem to work so well, and that yeah, that's my view. I maybe I'm just overthinking it.
Well, they're quite
It
clearly
needs to
just trying
be
to
totally
spread as much
disproportionate
fear as
to what
possible,
they
aren't they?
appear to be, not what they say they're trying to do, but what they appear to be trying to do. Um, it's it it's a wholly unnecessary display of brute force, which makes me think: are they just posing, or are they putting them, things in place before they pull the real sucker punch?
Well, quite clearly, the whoever runs Boris and Rishi and all of those people have basically said, look, you're in a room. This is what you've got to do. Or you've got to deal with this. You've got to deal with that. And I think that you can see from the Oliver Dowden interview that they really didn't want to have to deal with any of this shit. They'd much rather have a nice, quiet, easy life. Just running Britain however they would. And instead,
What
uh,
did Gideon Rackman say in this? He wrote an article which got my interest several years ago, talking about one world government, new world order,
okay, well, Rackman goes
to
to
which he said he was sympathetic.
yeah. Well,
It's in my blog.
he
Put it
goes
in;
to the
it'll
big
come
meetings, doesn't he? He goes to the big meetings.
up. Mm.
Um, yeah. Um, but yeah, it's quite obvious they've just been told you need to do all of this shit. Um, but yeah, I think there's going to be.
Oh no, what's that one there? Neil Ferguson, a virus modeler blows the alarm.
Oh, I think that's this guy called Neil Ferguson. He's apparently he's actually got coronavirus, but he's
And what's he saying? It's not as bad as they say, because I've got articles saying you know.
let's see. Neil Ferguson, a virus modeler, sounds the alarm. The epidemiologist and his team revealed the UK's coronavirus mitigation plan could cost thousands of lives.
Oh right, so that's just that's a catastrophe porn piece then.
Um, it's interesting the way they started. Last Tuesday, an email landed in Neil Ferguson's inbox from his boss, Alice Guest, the president at Imperial College London. She had two things to say to Professor Ferguson, an influential epidemiologist whose work had just been credited with helping to upend the coronavirus response strategies on each side of the Atlantic. Thank you for everything. Yeah. I think the whole point is, yeah, he's got a dry cough. They spend the first few paragraphs talking about how he's amazing, but he's got um okay, so I think what they're saying is that he said herd immunity is not cool.
Mm. Oh dear, yeah. And
It's not a very long article. It doesn't, so obviously it doesn't really go anywhere.
well, that's because there's no substance to the whole story. It's all hype. If you get deep down and dirty with the numbers, you realise there aren't any numbers worth the bloody name there yet.
Well, how many
That's
people
the point.
usually die
If you
every?
want to analyse it scientifically according to their own field, you can't do it.
How many people die daily in the UK on average at this time of the year? You know, over a 3 month period, how many people die? And, you know, how close is all of this to that? Um, you know, if it turns out that people with underlying conditions are dying, and those people were dying when they got these things,
Yeah.
and how
Well,
different, as I said, how
worldwide,
different is
the
that to the normal?
true death rate for 100,000 population, okay, heart disease 126. Is this annually? Per thousand.
So, you know how you said you've been looking up the
Yeah, I've still got all the windows open. I've got about
yeah. So
50
when it comes
windows
to
open.
actuarial, in the same way that you can have an APR for a loan, I wonder if you have an APR for mortality figures as well. Because you were saying, I want to know,
Yes,
is
yeah.
this daily, monthly, or annual? So whenever I see a stat, I need it transferred into how many a year.
Yeah, there's a standardized mortality ratio.
I love it. Of course there is. I mean, like, why wouldn't there be? I mean, if not, you just have madness. So what is the
And they
standard?
are, I mean, they're all related to insurance policies and all the rest of it.
But
And
what's
so, of course, and lots of it is to do with welfare economics as well. Like, how do you pay for an aging population? I mean, you get into eugenics, euthanasia, and population control. As
soon as you
soon as you
study
take a stick
insurance?
at it, the same with vaccines as well. Um, and of course, all the people who are eugenicists now, they always sort of like Prince Philip or something. They say, "Oh, of course, we're not allowed to talk about this." You know, old people are a little bit sort of, you know,
Squeamish.
they're very sort of lily-livered about this sort of thing. You know, this is, I mean, that's how they talk, but they basically have the view that there are way too many people, and that you know, the undesirables really ought to be taken out and shot. Well, whether they're the shooters and they're the others that would sort of rather they quietly starve to death. Boris Johnson used the word "inundation" in the debate with Jeremy Corbyn. I remarked at the time what a peculiar word to use,
What did he
because that
say?
is actually the technical term for people dying from malnutrition. sort of slowly through starvation.
In a nation.
It's a disaster-based phrase. It's not something you would use in relation to someone being economical with the truth.
But you know
Which is
why?
the
You know
context
why he
you
used
used
that
it in.
term.
Pardon?
You know why he used that term.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's just
probably the type of language he would have had to use as a child in order to impress his father, because his father worked in a population. His father,
yeah,
when they
maybe.
when they were in America, his father worked in the field of population for the World Bank.
Oh, good God.
And I would
Right.
imagine that's more that. So right
So,
now,
I mean, when he said it, I'd never heard the word before, and I realised he was sort of saying, "Oh, well, he's basically lying or something." So I looked it up, and then I looked it up in several different dictionaries, and I thought, "Fucking hell, what a very, very strange turn of phrase. You wouldn't use that word. That's come out of an interest in another field of obviously it was the population control field.
yeah, that was his father's. So how
It's
how do you
INA, it's INA, inanition.
inanition? Fucking hell, I've never seen that before. Exhaustion caused by lack of mental or spiritual vigor. And so, what was he talking about? Was he talking about poverty or
He
what?
was basically saying that Jeremy Corbyn was being a liar. It was in the debate, the televised debate. If you put that in my blog, you'll find the link to it, and I've got the whole. You'd have to look on not the Grub Street Journal. It won't come up in a browse in Google.
It was mentioned in the Daily Mail. Somehow. Yeah, because they were analysing everything. They were looking at the ties. Let's see. Here we go. Borisisms explained. Dead cat, Fermat's last theorem, and then inanition. Yeah, as you said. Yeah, so what do the UK column people have to say about Oliver Dowden?
I Do you know? I don't know. I mean, I watched it on Friday, but I mean, now I just listen to it when I'm reading something else. I read and listen to it at the same time. I mean, it's not
Yeah, you don't have to
not
watch.
always
Yeah.
as compelling as it sometimes is.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, I've got a backdrop behind me. So my friend gave me a backdrop.
Oh,
So
you were
I know,
telling me about that. Yeah.
yeah, I know it looks like a white wall, but it's actually a white piece of paper. And yeah, I've been a bit nervous, not nervous, but basically I haven't, used it properly. This is the first time I've sort of used it,
Mm.
but I could use it for my normal language lessons if I can get any students. But the other thing is I should just make really short films, um, and put them out about
Mm.
whatever. I got a message from David the other day. I think I
Oh
said hello.
right. Okay.
I said
Yeah.
hello to him on Skype, and he said he'd managed to. I thought he had two sons. He's got three.
He has. They're twins. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think he said he managed to get them home.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's Scarborough, if he hasn't
Yeah.
sold his
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's sounds like a very good move at this time. Um, that'll be an interesting household, won't it? David and his sons, you know, with the apocalypse happening or whatever. I wonder
I,
what they'll get up
you
to.
know, I would only be worried if I were them is if Scarborough is a 5G hotspot, because I'm absolutely sure that 5G has got something to do with all of this in the mix. And but more as a secondary effect, if they go as Denmark have done for the full-on vaccination, Okay.
Or Denmark, Denmark Huawei completely.
Well, Denmark have actually brought legislation in already to say that people have to. There's no choice. If
Yeah,
there's a
France
vaccination,
are going to do
then
it.
everybody has to have it.
Yeah, I think France and Germany. So that's the thing, because the Huawei debate was something I was only watching from here through UK politics. It
Mhm.
took me a moment or two to say, well, what are they saying in France? What are they saying in Germany? And of course, they have exactly the same thing. So Merkel is trying to persuade everybody in Germany, or I don't know, however she's doing it, but she's basically saying we've got to do it. France are
Mhm.
saying we've got to do it. Um, no one's saying no. Everyone's basically saying we've got to do it. So then Ian Duncan Smith said, "Oh, we can't do it," and then they said that was the biggest rebellion Boris has had so far. Um, but they made it through because I'm sure. I mean, the Labour Party are probably just going to say we love 5G, we love Huawei, we love China,
I
right?
don't know, Range. I really don't know. But
Well, there was a
I mean,
vote. Anyway, there was a
it's a
vote, and I think
control
Boris
grid, a
won.
snooping grid. It isn't. It really isn't needed for the Internet of Things. They say that it is, but it isn't. 3G is more than fast enough. It's again, it's one of those things that doesn't make any sense apart
But
from
well,
it's
5G would be really, really good for surveillance.
yeah, it's nefarious possibilities which make it make any sense at all.
Did you see the story about what Israel are doing with coronavirus? Um,
No, I haven't. No.
it's a surveillance story. Um, Here it is. Israel spies to keep track of virus sufferers via mobiles. Privacy advocates concerned by Benjamin Netanyahu's surveillance measure. So Netanyahu, yeah, Shin Bet will use data harvested from millions of mobile phones to triangulate the locations and travel patterns of people
Yeah,
exposed to
I mean,
coronavirus.
that is just such a non-story. I mean, anyone
Why?
that knows anything about sort of mobile packet technology knows that you can triangulate people to within 10 meters of where they are and call in a missile strike on them if you so wish. I mean,
So what, you're saying that's not interesting because they could do it anyway?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but the
they've been
point
doing
is
it for
they're saying
years.
they're
I mean,
normalizing it for the
you know,
virus.
if anyone doesn't know that, they simply haven't been paying attention.
Yeah, but they're saying they're normalizing it for the virus.
Uh, I don't know. I mean, I really,
Don't you get it? Watch, mate.
I
Watch,
don't
mate.
know. To
Fucking
me,
Earth
that isn't
closed, mate.
news. I like that front page on The Economist. It's really quite witty, I
Yeah,
think.
the Earth's closed, mate. Uh,
Uh,
as 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 um as I remember hearing when I worked at a bank in Paris, somebody telephoned asking to clear some bonds, and the guy who ran the ClearNet or the Euroclear service, he was Cameroonian. He picked up the phone and he said, "Le boutique est fermé," like that. So I quite like the shop is closed.
yeah.
Um, so
Look, mate, I'm going to go and grab myself a coffee and have another cigarette because it's quite taxing on the old. Yeah, it's perplexing this stuff. You know, I mean, the thing is, I'm so personally befuddled by it because there are no even outrageous explanations that even get close to kind of thinking, you know, right, well, it could. There's not a simple binary or even a set of variables that apply to this where you say, right, okay, however far fetched that is, then maybe it's that. But on the face of it, the story is so ridiculous. I It just defies any. It almost defies analysis. I mean, they've really got. It's just
we're
it.
drowning.
Yeah. There's there's nothing to say. I mean, you just have to wait and see, really. I mean,
Well,
it's
I still think there's room for a curatorial function to, sift
well,
through.
even if you look on the BBC website, all it is flew, 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 flew. You know, one flew over the
Yeah,
cuckoo's nest. We've all gone fucking
Roger,
mad.
but Roger, you've got to recognize that for somebody like myself, and me talking to you right now is sort of kickstarting my productivity, creativity. Um, it's brilliant because it's rare that a single issue monopolizes the news cycle. And so for somebody like me who's trying to get people to improve their well, increase their confidence when it comes to communication, I can say, look, it's exactly the same words being used to talk about everything. They're just talking about contagion and spread, and that's it. Has it got here yet? What are the numbers? Blah, blah, blah. Obviously, it get much more interesting once we start talking about annualized mortality rates, as you are. But, you know, anyway, no, I appreciate it. It's a bit boring, but
I mean, I don't think it's not boring. It's just befuddling. Maybe there's a dissonance in it, which it's an it's an irresolvable, irreconcilable mess of contradictions.
yeah,
It's
brilliant
just
opportunity, though, for
it's so
conversation.
fucking messy. You know, it's there's very little beauty in it. I think it's kind of like
But if you look at the 2008 thing, right, that happened in whenever September. How long did it take everybody to just say, what happened? Who cares? Not long.
well,
People like us were probably watching everything bouncing around, but, um, for certain other people who, they just said, when do we get back on with it? And they got back on with it, right?
uh,
I mean, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of unnecessary wars in
I
between.
I used to spend a lot of time at the pub in those days, so I kind of, I
You
just
just got
dragged
on
my
with it,
way through
exactly.
all of it, mate. It's sort of
Yeah, that's not going to be
so.
possible anymore. No more pubs.
Well, yeah, that's they've taken that one away. Yeah,
Because that's the other thing.
they may
Because,
live to regret that. Actually,
well, yeah, if you think about it,
I mean,
whatever it is that's
it's
at
a
stake
schoolboy
here,
error that is. You know.
whatever is at stake, they were prepared through whatever form of logic they were pursuing to take so many things away that
Who
there's hardly anything left on the table.
who was it got told off for actually saying, what? Oh, it was Peston, wasn't it? Sort of says, is anything really that serious? But what could possibly be so serious that you've got to shut the pubs? Was it? It was Peston, wasn't it? I mean, he
Really.
went back up in my estimation. You can forgive a man a lot for actually pointing out that closing the pubs is just never a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a weird one. I mean, I don't know whether they should be shutting them or not.
I, mate, I,
I mean, I walk past
they
pubs.
certainly shouldn't be shutting down the world economy.
No,
I mean,
I walk past the pub
that
opposite.
doesn't benefit. Well, I'll tell you who that benefits. It benefits big governments, central banks, big banks who are basically
Yeah,
zombie
but
banks, and
yeah,
huge
but
corporations. That's who
Roger,
that
yeah,
benefits.
but exactly, but that's who we're talking about. I mean, that it's not like, okay, they haven't been mentioned that many times in this conversation, but there's no one else that's doing this. It's them.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And that's the peston point. What is it that's so important, and to who, that everything else has to shut down?
yeah, but no, I mean, I don't think they even shut the pubs in the Blitz. For goodness sake.
Yeah, well, this is the whole point then. So what the fuck's going on?
Well, they're
I
trying to
mean, they
stop
could
people
be,
talking to each other or something. I mean,
they, they could say,
I think we've got cut off.